And it's loading. Are we live? I see something very strange.
We are.
We are live. I just saw Vance popping in as the first person in the forum. Doing your job, Vance. Great job.
I'm trying.
Oh, better put myself on mute. So, yes, we are officially live, and I am seeing myself, which is not good. All right. Well, welcome everybody to Aeon Byte Live, episode 24. This is where, as always, we do the live show. And today we will be talking about modern paganism. Of course, I should repeat myself as I will because people slowly like to tune in, join the chat, and so forth. But today, as always, it's a special show. And we are joined by the two hosts of a podcast that I follow and I enjoy and really keeps me on the cutting edge of non-Abrahamic dispensations, as well as everything that's going on with modern magic and so forth. Cutting edge of good stuff, and that's the Cosmic Keys podcast. Highly recommended. And again, I will repeat it. It will be on our show notes. And as always, this is live. It will be on YouTube too, but I will also put it out on iTunes, Spotify, and all those wonderful podcatchers and internet radios out there in a couple of days. And I'll have, of course, all the information on the show notes. Then again, I will repeat it. But so with us today, the hosts of the Cosmic Keys podcast, we've got Scarlet Ravenswood. Thanks for joining us, Scarlet. It's truly a pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on today. I'm excited to talk to you guys.
We are too. And we've got Dan, and I think I'm forgetting how to say your last name once again, and I apologize. Is it Shukas?
Yeah, Shukas.
Shukas. All right. Well, Dan, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Miguel and Vance. We're really excited.
Excited too. And yes, as Dan just said, we've got Vance the Moon Dog and his backgrounds. How you doing, Vance, tonight?
Not too bad for a non-Abrahamic, or whatever.
Well, that's the question I always wonder if somebody comes and asks me, what are you? And if they say, are you a Christian? I would say, yes. Are you a pagan? Yes. Are you Jewish? Yeah. Are you a humanist? Yes. I am everything. Because why not? What about you, Vance? Does anybody come and ask you, what are you? What do you answer?
No, they don't care. But I say I'm a Christian. I say I'm a mystic. I say I'm a diagnostic. Because
diagnostic?
Because I'm unsure of the existence of two gods.
Oh.
There you go. There you go.
But I'm a Gnostic. I say that too.
There you go. Good deal. Well, as people are starting to go into the chat room and filter in, let's talk about how you guys got started, Dan and Scarlet. We'll start with you, Scarlet. Tell us about your background and how you decided to pivot towards paganism.
Yeah, so I was pretty much raised non-religious for the most part. I mean, I guess I'm Episcopalian, like I was baptized and all that kind of stuff, but really my parents didn't take me to church much. We were the kind of family that we only went to church when the grandparents were visiting. I pretty much grew up in a very open household, open to other cultures, other religions. And from a young age, I was always fascinated by ancient civilizations, specifically ancient Egypt, starting with that, but then other, cultures around the world and history and stuff like that. So eventually I got introduced to, I guess, Wicca first when I was a young teen. At that time, there was a lot of popular stuff in media, like the movie The Craft and Practical Magic. So it was this kind of like big movement that was attracting a lot of people. So I started, with those movies, but then I found my bookshelf at Barnes and Noble and pretty much everyone who's around my age who became Wiccan or pagan has a similar story where, we find out from this stuff from pop culture and then we sneak into Barnes and Noble and we start buying books from the one bookcase. It's always the one metaphysical, bookcase there. And so from that point, I started reading about topics like Wicca and more in general paganism. And I, discovered the idea of like, oh, maybe there could be like a goddess too, or maybe multiple gods and multiple goddesses. And I was just like immediately drawn to it like a moth to the flame. So that's kind of where it all started. And I've been on this pagan path really since then. Mm-hmm.
And in your journey, obviously, you went into it. You just gave us the reasons. Have you had any? Those my dogs barking. Sorry, I have more than one dog. Did you have any experiences, mystical experience that might have supported you or reinforced the idea you were on the right path of paganism?
Yeah, definitely. So I did see a ghost when I was younger, like when I was around 12. I grew up in a very old home in upstate New York. So, I was always interested in the paranormal. And when I started learning about Wicca and paganism, I convinced, some of my friends at the time to, get into it as well. So I was kind of like running my own little mini coven at like 14, trying out spells. And I was also doing tarot too, a little bit. I got my first tarot deck around that age too. So I was starting to learn a bit about tarot, getting used to the concept of archetypes. So there was a lot of stuff going on, but definitely my experiences with tarot, my experiences with spell work to a certain extent too, definitely made me believe that there is at least something going on, even if I didn't have it all figured out then, and I still don't have it all figured out now. But it definitely gave me the feeling that I was on the right path.
We're all working out things. And you mentioned the goddess. Is that something that attracted you to paganism? The idea that there was a divine feminine that you could relate to as a woman?
Yeah. Especially, I think, when you're a kid and you're learning about religion in school at a very young age. I mean, you learn about, the main Abrahamic religions where women tend to have a more minor role. And you don't really learn too much about the pre-Abrahamic religion. So you don't really get introduced to the concept of goddesses other than really studying Greek mythology, like in middle school. And I was always fascinated by Greek mythology. So when I realized that people were actually, connecting spiritually to the sacred feminine, and that it was this, big concept, that was really empowering for a 13-year-old girl who's going through a lot of like bodily changes and like doesn't know how she feels about her body and her role in life, to come up with the concept like, oh, there could be a goddess too, and maybe the sacred feminine, the sacred masculine should be in balance. So all of those ideas really blew my mind at that age. And I think probably most young girls who, come to those ideas or start looking up paganism or Wicca or sacred feminine, it really, kind of transforms them in a way.
Yeah, I can understand, and the statistics say it. I think in millennials, paganism and Wicca is just shooting up when it comes to popularity. So it is feeding a role or quenching a thirst or whatever you want to call it. So Dan, let's go to you. Tell us about your background and how did you evolve or pivot into paganism?
Yeah, well, so I was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic grade school in the Chicago suburbs and then public high school. Um, and when I was younger, I was kind of like good at being Catholic because I sort of like I just am naturally spiritual, and from the beginning, I didn't really have a big issue with it. That was like in the '90s, and then as I became a teenager, and you get into the rebellious phases and stuff, I'd say like the spiritual shifts for me occurred basically through psychedelics in my teen years. That really changed my point of view, and it didn't really like discard or discount Catholicism or Christianity, but it definitely made it way more like universal and stuff. And then when I was in college, I had a pretty rough injury that when I was snowboarding, I actually broke 3 vertebrae in my neck, and had kind of like a rough, traumatic recovery process that opened a lot of spiritual insights to me. And then I'd say, now that I'm more into, well, I practice astrology and I follow a lot of different esoteric belief systems, including Gnosticism. And I've been listening to your show for like years. But a big shift happened in college when I discovered Manly P. Hall. It was sort of like a crazy experience where like a book literally kind of fell off the shelf, and that was the book The Secret Teaching of All Ages. And if anyone's familiar with that book, it's like a lot of hermeticism, Kabbalah, astrology, paganism, and ancient Egyptian stuff. And that went, I mean, like the experience of first dipping my toes into those waters was like, this is it. This is my thing. This is my stuff. So since then, I don't really claim the pagan label. I don't really own the pagan label, but I'm definitely like pagan adjacent. Like nature is extremely important to my like peace of mind, and I find a lot of stuff a lot of stuff within paganism I definitely resonate with, but I never really like in the way that Scarlet has, I never really connected with the pagan community or those sort of neo-pagan belief systems. But anything esoteric, occult, woo-woo, I'm in pretty much.
You're a heretic. That's what
Oh
you
yeah,
are,
that's
man.
a great word for me.
That's
Ask my
one.
Catholic school teachers.
Yes, I remember those Sunday schools and everything else. And so the question would be for you, Scarlett, if somebody asks you what is paganism, how did you answer? I mean, like for example, on your YouTube channel recently, you had a video, is Shinto paganism? Is paganism just basically non-Abrahamic religions, or what do you tell people?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the problem is it's almost impossible to define because paganism is such a huge umbrella term. So yeah, on the one hand, I think you can define it as something that's non-Abrahamic. I think you can also define it as something that really reveres nature to a much larger extent than some other religions. So nature is a huge component. You can define it as, some people might define it just as like the older religions, so the pre-Abrahamic religions, whereas in some people might go ahead and include things like Hinduism or Shinto, and some might not. So it kind of depends on what you feel comfortable with. Me personally, I just kind of define it as like a spiritual connection to nature and looking towards the pre-Abrahamic religions for spiritual wisdom and guidance and connection. So that's how I define it, but every pagan's going to have their own rule book because there are no rules. So that's part of the problem, but it's also a big blessing because we kind of get to decide what we connect with.
Yeah, it's kind of like Neo in the Matrix, a world without rules, boundaries without controls, where everything's possible. So that's always a good thing until it's not, which is a topic we'll get into very soon about the issues with paganism, because there's issues with every movement there is. I mean, we are humans. We have a great ability to screw things up majorly, good things as they're going. It's in our nature. And for the audience, again, this is Aeon Byte Live. For those of you who have just joined or are joining, we've got Dan and Scarlett Ravenswood, the hosts of Cosmic Keys podcast, joining us tonight talking about paganism. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. Vance likes a lot of question marks, and we'll try to take them. If you give us a donation through the, I already forgot the name of it, the hot chats or whatever it's called.
Super chat.
Yes, super chats, whatever you're called, drawing a blank. We will put you at the top of the queue. And again, one more time, this show will be on YouTube right after, and I will have the audio version and all the podcast providers that we have. And for members and patrons, I usually put a nice little bonus, which I will let you know after this show. So we shall continue. So we were talking about the problems with paganism. And I think, why don't we get to that? I mean, I don't think it's a problem. Vance and I spend quite a lot of time talking and sometimes making fun of Gnostic movements and Gnosticism itself, because if you can't laugh at yourself, well, then the demiurge will laugh at you, as we like to say. So there's nothing wrong with seeing what the issues are. And in fact, Scarlet, you recently put out, I thought was a very brave video where you just went out and you said,
Yeah.
all right, these are the issues I see today with paganism. And as far as I can tell, you have not been cancel cultured by anybody. So you survived. But I think it's
not yet. I put it out on like Tuesday, so there's still time.
the pitchforks will still can come. Yeah, it won't be Christian pitchforks. It might be pagan pitchforks.
Right.
But so what would you say is, I know the reasons. I wrote them down. I watched the video. What would you say are a couple of your main issues with the pagan movement?
Yeah, so I think probably the one thing that I bring up that most people can kind of wrap their head around is the need to change to match the new times that we live in. And one of the things that really inspired me creating this video talking about the pagan community and the issues I see in it is because I've been hearing all these news stories lately at some of the larger pagan institutions and larger events and larger websites are now ending or no longer financially viable. So you have this big shift happening, and there's this huge dichotomy because on the one hand, all these old institutions and large events that people traveled all the way around to see, people seem to no longer be either interested in what they are providing or no longer able or willing to spend the funds to participate in that. But at the same time, you have this huge resurgence in paganism and Wicca online and within social media. So there's clearly, so many new people who are coming into paganism and really excited to learn more about it. So there's this disconnect on what the community is currently offering in terms of real world experiences, I guess you could say, in real life events and meetups and conventions and even covens. And then what the people are really wanting or what they're expecting. So there's this big kind of shift that's happening. And on the one hand, I can see how that's very frustrating for a lot of the people that have been in the pagan movement for a long time, especially people who have gone through certain lineages and been initiated. And then they look at all these younger pagans and it's like, I have zero interest in being initiated. Though, of course, there are still, a lot of Gardnerians, and, there are still initiatory systems in place. But at least what I've been seeing and from the people that have been connecting with me, they're pretty much, most of them are very solitary and not necessarily interested in joining a system from the past, but more interested in kind of starting their own. So yeah, there's this big shift going on. And I think the whole community as a whole is trying to figure out, how do we embrace the positives that technology is offering us without alienating the people who are, have been strong leaders in the community? So how do we kind of figure that out? And then at the same time, kind of how do we move forward? And this is so hard, like we were talking about before, how do you define paganism? Part of the issue is we can't even agree on any points. So that makes it difficult to stand for anything. When everyone has such differing opinions and views on what paganism means for them. So that was one of the big issues I brought up in the video is kind of, we really need to figure out how to move it forward to the 21st century and connect with people and the paganism that they're wanting in their own lives.
Good deal. And of course, you don't have a pip of paganism. So again, it's going to be very fluid, very, I guess, anarchist. But of course, anarchist systems do work, like Alcoholics Anonymous and secret societies. It can work as just growing pains and so forth. And what about you, Dan? Do you have any issues with the pagan community? Anything you see that you might want to bring up? I mean, sometimes it's important.
So the Scarlet and I, as co-hosts of the show, we're always trying to connect with the other people in the Chicago area. We're trying to find the others, and it's one of those things that takes a lot of work. You know, I'm sort of I guess my problem with paganism in a way is the in general, just like the way that Wicca and some of these like 20th century neo-pagan movements were sort of created like they treat it like it's like this really ancient lineage, but really it was sort of like a hodgepodge of ideas thrown together in the 1950s, was it, whenever
Mhm.
Gerald Gardner was around. And like me, as somebody who's trying to read texts from like the BC years or whatever, I'm sort of like, wait, I'm down with it and everything, but it's a little bit more of my style to just like dive into esoteric topics and come to a conclusion on my own. However, you know, the community factor, the network factor, the in real life interactions that you can get by being a part of a Wiccan community or a coven or anything is really valuable. And like I would hang with Wiccans or pagans, or you know, I would go to events and stuff if I found the right group of people. So I think the good thing about it is that they do have the community aspect down. They value like group spiritual experiences, like you know, because there is something to group activity, and there's power in groups, which is even, you know, like an argument for why it's still valuable to go to church, you know, or some type of weekly service. So I admire the community factor, the organizational factor, but like a good heretic, I'm like, I don't want to be tied down to it, but or anything. So I guess that's my point.
No, communities are great for creating those egregores. So I certainly love the community spirit. I personally always had problems connecting spiritually in Chicago with other groups, or just having spirituality in general. Since I've moved, my channels have opened. I'm not saying Chicago isn't spiritual, but I think especially when I used to go ghost hunting there down, you know, you go downtown where Al Capone and stuff. I worked for a company that we'd give ghost tours and hunt and have seances and all that. But Chicago has just so much dark energy because of all the suffering and death and materialism there. Have you, Dan, have you ever experienced that while you're in Chicago, or is it just me?
No, I definitely experienced that in Chicago. I mean, I grew up here. I see this like I have like a love hate. I have a major love hate thing with Chicago.
Same here.
um, it's like, oh yeah, there is that like the archetype of Chicago is literally like a Tommy gun like blasting somebody to death, and it still exists today. Like, and so I think that's part of the spirit of place here, but there's all I also think Chicago has this magic. Like I think of the World's Fair, I think of like the neoclassical architecture, I think of the museums, and there's this like not Hellenistic, but there's this like neoclassical or like, you know, old school like Greek columns everywhere, like the stuff along the Lakeshore Drive, and I'm like, that like lights my fire. So it's definitely a love-hate thing. And I'm on the far north side now, more in like Rogers Park, Evanston, and Lake Michigan kind of um keeps me sane in a lot of ways too. But yeah, there's definitely a heavy energy here that might have been here from the start, especially considering that the city was like built on top of a swamp. Like swamp energy is like, this is coming from me after living in New Orleans. Like swamp energy is like heavy and aggressive and abrasive. So there is some magic here. As far as connecting with other people locally, it is really hard too. Like the two of us are constantly struggling with that. And I have a problem whenever I'm in a big group of pagans or witches or whatever, I get like drained and exhausted and freak out. And I'm like, we got to go. I don't know what's going on. I'm feeling something weird. And I don't know if that's just when like a bunch of like really weird, witchy, weird kind of magical folks are all in one room. It's really intense. So we both have struggled with it too. And that's why having a podcast is fun, because you're not limited by geography at all.
Yeah, that's true. And yeah, Rogers Park is awesome. I think that's a place I love the energy. And it's one of those places you could be walking down the street and you'll see an Orthodox Jew walking by, a Muslim mullah. You'll see, it's a
Yeah.
very multicultural. So Rogers Park has great energy, great food. Yeah, move out here, Dan, to the country where I am. Of course, the food's terrible and it's all Lutheran churches. I don't know.
No, I know where you live and I love that area. I'm super jealous.
It's beautiful and the energy's great. And again, it's since moving here a year, it really has opened my channels of communication. Even in Chicago, I could not barely fill a dream journal. Now every day I'm waking up and I'm like, oh my God, the symbols and everything. So, but to each his own, you never know. What about you, Scarlet? What has been your experience with the energy in Chicago?
Yeah, like Dan, I have definitely a love-hate relationship with Chicago. So I live on the north side. So it's kind of, near Rogers Park. And I like this area. I am kind of close to the lake, and I feel like I'm the type of person where I will go crazy if I don't get like my daily walks in nature. So that's very important to me. So on the one hand, I think there is a lot of beauty to Chicago, especially what Dan was saying about the architecture here. I mean, Chicago, I think, is the first place to create a skyscraper, and our skyscrapers in our downtown is very beautiful. And our lakefront is very beautiful. But at the same time, it is very harsh. And the cold weather definitely does not help that. I mean, we're probably going to get several polar vortex to look forward to this winter. And it seems every winter it's kind of getting worse. So that is really difficult, kind of the harshness of the weather in winter. And then, yeah, also the kind of the harshness of the history here. It has a violent past, it has a violent present, it will probably have a violent future. Though at the same time, it is kind of fun because we have all that history, and I'm a huge history buff. So even like with like when Dan was talking about Capone and that energy, I'm like, oh yeah, every time I go to the Green Mill, which was like Capone's old spot, I always like, can I sit on his booth? Like, I want to have my drinks here. It's like his old jazz club. And I love all those like historical venues in Chicago, and I really enjoy them. So yeah, I mean, the city has character, and I like that. Like, I love to live in very distinctive places. So I do think there's a soul here, but it is harsh, and in a lot of ways. So yeah, it's definitely a love-hate relationship.
There you go. And a couple other questions. One thing in your video, Scarlet, and I agree with a lot of what you said. I can apply to also the neo-Gnostic community and other ones. For example, you talked about the need to stay out of politics, and I agree with that 100%. Vance and I work very hard to make sure that politics doesn't get to the show, doesn't get to some of the groups like Facebook groups we run. That's just statecraft, and it's temporal. We're trying to work on things that are eternal and are timeless,
Right.
and who the nominee is and what the latest media outrage, taking us by the carrot over here. And yeah, like you said, it poisons the well, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's the point where all the pitchforks are coming out right now.
Yeah, see,
I knew it was
does
going to
it.
happen. And so I've had like, experiences on this for a while, just because every once in a while with my YouTube channel, I would like bring up something political, in the past. And it was like, I was getting hate on both sides. I'm either not progressive enough or too progressive or whatever. So it's kind of like you can't win. And then at a certain point, I realized that, we can't really connect as a community if we keep on tearing each other down. And I've always been interested in the fact that when it comes to my social media presence, whether that's on Instagram or YouTube, the hate that I was expecting to get, or the trolling, when I started all this kind of stuff, well, I'm like, oh yeah, like the Christians will, throw me Bible verses, all that stuff. And like, I
That's
was
what they're
ready for
supposed to
that.
do. Yeah, they're just
And
doing what they're supposed to.
I still get that, like from time to time, but in reality, what I do get is hate from other pagans. And I'm like, we're supposed to be like, love the planet, love each other, kind of people. So I think at least for me and my channel, even though I know in a way it's impossible to live without politics, and I've definitely gotten called out for my own privilege and saying I don't want to bring politics into my channel, but at the same time, I don't want that for my particular space. I don't really think that it's going to be conducive to building a community for me, and it's definitely not good for my mental health because getting all of that from both sides. So I'd rather just kind of keep paganism, at least for me, as something that's more spiritual. And like you said, not really in temporal. I want to personally connect with something a bit longer lasting and more higher, I guess you could say.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's tough. I'm getting a lot of hate from it, but like I'm used to it by now, so it doesn't bother me too much.
Yeah, and speaking more or less, this kind of ties into politics. I liked your other point. Back when I was sort of, I think, I don't even want to talk what I am today, but when I was interested in the Libertarian Party, one of the problems with the Libertarian Party is because it's so open-minded, it was just an excuse for a lot of people who wanted to get stoned and meet chicks and get wild to show up at these political events. And again, libertarians are about rights, so you can do it, but it was kind of a pain in the butt. And you say, isn't that what these pagan things are? People think it's just about free love and let's just let it all hang out instead of having an experience, making a community.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I've run into too, and part of that might just be being like a young girl at these events, because I'm always getting people who approach me or like bringing inappropriate things into the conversation or making assumptions about my own personal life, and I think it's a tough thing, because on the one hand, pagans tend to be very sex positive, and I think that's great, but at the same time, traditionally in pagan events, there's been like a lot of kind of inappropriate activity that's taken place that was non-consensual. So here now, I feel very uncomfortable when like people are like bringing that stuff, like, when it's completely out of context, up to me. And that was something I talked about a little while ago. And that's one of the reasons I think that so many young girls reach out to me through social media, and they're like, I would love to go to events, but the one time I went to an event, there was like this person who said something and it just made me feel uncomfortable. So then they just shut down and don't bother connecting and just do the YouTube, internet, connecting. And I was almost that person. Like I almost didn't want to attend events anymore because there was always a couple people who were there for the wrong reasons. And I have a much thicker skin now, so like it doesn't really bother me. But it's a tough sell, because on the one hand, I want everyone to be positive with that aspect of themselves. And like, yes, there is like a spiritual component to our own sexuality, and that's great too. But I don't think it's appropriate at certain wide ranging like events that are open to the public. I would love to take family to events sometimes, or friends, and like, and it's kind of tough, so it's hard to kind of explain. But I think that it's really a negative thing for our community when so many young girls have an issue and then they just kind of don't bother in the future. And I'd love to, encourage others and all this huge community that's forming to attend events in person. So yeah, it's tough from time to time.
Yeah, like you said, you want to take your younger sister, and there's a guy dressed like the Gimp from Pulp Fiction next to you. So,
and every time I go to an event, there's at least one Gimp person, and I'm like, really? And
Stay
like,
in
I'm
your
all for
box.
that, but like keep it, maybe not at the public event.
Right, right. What about you, Dan? I see you kind of hiding your GIMP costume under the couch as we were talking about this.
Up, busted.
No, what's your view on this? Or you think politics should stay out of paganism? I know you guys do a great job of keeping politics out of your podcast, and that's one of the many reasons I enjoy listening to it. What are your views?
Well, so I can. I'm of the opinion that over the past few years, politics has ruined all communities. Like, it's sort of like it infects a community and turns people against each other.
It's like the tower. It's like a Tower of Babel, isn't it? Everything falls apart, and everybody's at each other's throats.
Yeah, exactly. And in I can speak more rather than the pagan community. I have experience, in sort of the arts community in Chicago, and that is a highly, highly politicized group of people, especially like right after the last election. But I feel like by now that as we enter 2020, even though it's another election year, like so many people are just burnt out on it. Like everybody reaches a burnout point where you can't just be so offended by everything because it's exhausting to be offended by everything. And that's coming from me, who I actually was sort of offended by quote unquote bigotry, and my thing now is, especially when we like book people for the show, I love testing how I can actually embrace people on both sides of the aisle, I guess. Because like I've listened to even like semi-political podcasts that are like conservative and like really, really liberal. And there's days where I wake up and I'm like, the most annoying person in the world is this right-wing person. And then there's days where I'm like, the most annoying person in the world is this like leftist person. And I like finding common ground between everybody and sort of like playing both for both teams. And that's how I've always been anyways. And that's how so many people are. But I like testing myself. Like, how can I find common ground with this extreme right winger or this extreme left winger? And I don't really like engaging like with real extremists, but thoughtful people that when you look at them and you have to put them in a box, they're definitely on the right or definitely on the left. It's like, I like testing myself to be like, can I vibe with both?
Yeah, good deal. And yeah, another question I have. But before I get that, somebody was asking in the chat room, who are the guests? We got Dan and Scarlet. They are the hosts of the Cosmic Keys podcast. If you have a question, put it on the chat. Put some question marks.
We have a
And
few.
well, yes. Well, Vance, do you have a question or comment, or what does the audience have to say? Do they have their pitchforks out?
Yeah, like as soon as you started talking about politics, it started heating up a little bit. But I have something to say about politics, and I'll tell you what the questions are. I invented, and this is an example of how I think about it. I invented a three-dimensional system to describe political positions, which is left, right, up, down, and back and forward. And if you map people on that system, and left is like mom, I want to take care of you, everything. And right is like dad, is like, the traditional mom and dad, right? And the dad's like, stand up on your own, be self-sufficient, be tough, stand up against the world. And then up is true liberty. I mean, in other words, freedom. Down is slavery. And then forward is progress to the future. And backwards is backwards. Backwards is backwards is we want to go back. It was better in the past. We want to go back in the past. And so, without expanding and taking too much time on it, you can see that some people are right down, right? They're like right wing radicals, and they want to make everybody like them. And there's a left wing version of that. And then there's the left wing ups, right? Who are for freedom. And then those are the true quote unquote liberals, libertarians probably fit in there somewhere. But anyway, you get the idea. And there's so the problem is everybody's talking in like these little boxes, but they don't think outside the box literally and see the good and bad points on both sides. So that's what, you know, I know you and I try to do, and that kind of solves all the polarity, you know. So that's my comment about the politics.
Good deal. Hopefully
And,
they'll come after you with pitchforks and not Scarlet Den. All right.
What's the pitchfork? You know, if they are, they're the down ones on either left, right. But anyway, we got some questions.
Sure.
This is an easy one. Could we generalize that paganism is generally animistic? Are pagans generally animistic, do you think? And
Dan or Scarlet, whoever wants to take it.
Yeah. I think
both.
that's a good starting point. I think animism is a component to most pagan religions out there, and it's kind of where we all started. It's like all religions started with animism, kind of. So yeah, I think that's one way to define it for sure.
I agree too. Animism is a really fun category to put everything into, and just to the concept that everything is alive, and it makes the world feel like more enchanted and less dead.
Good deal. Any other questions?
Another one was who believes in Solomon Goetia demons?
Whoa.
I believe in them. I don't hang out with them or mess with them.
Don't have a beer with them or anything?
Nope.
Yeah. I mean, I think I believe that there are some kind of, you know, maybe demon forces or darker forces. I don't know if like those specifically, but I think there are these like negative forces in the world that I haven't decided yet if they're named or not. But yeah, I'm kind of with Dan on there. And I don't tend to like go down that path because you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, could it be archons?
Satan? Devil's gonna get you. Any other questions, Vance?
Yeah, we just got one. Okay, let's see. The question's not all the way there yet. Okay, Toth, let's get the rest of the question in there. Elementals. Have you guys worked with elementals? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, in Wicca, we kind of have our own kind of version of that. Or I don't really define myself as Wiccan now, but kind of they use it as like the traditional for like, you know, directions and for elements and kind of connecting with those. So yeah, I mean, I definitely do work with those elementals. Mm-hmm. What about you, Dan?
But yeah, elemental, like what comes to mind, actually, it was in that book that I referenced, Manly P. Hall's The Secret Teaching of All Ages. And I think what the question was asking about is like the elemental spirits or creatures. So like air is like sylphs,
and
water,
and
undines and salamanders and gnomes.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of do believe in those things, and there's like reference to them in a lot of grimoires and stuff. It makes me even think of like, I was an English major, and my favorite Shakespeare play was The Tempest, and Prospero has like an elemental. He just like has this like servitor elemental thing like that does whatever he wants. So I think there is something to that. And also like with when I think of like elemental spirits or stuff, I think they can be like very chaotic and disruptive from what I've heard. And they're kind of out it would balancing the four elements out in the universe on their own. And when humans try to control them or enslave them or whatever, I've heard that it can lead to problems. So I find it all interesting though. And I've even heard that air elementals can get rid of chemtrails.
All right. Where paganism meets conspiracy theory. It had to happen. Very cool. Yeah, there's a question I'm seeing from Joseph Correa, and he's
Yeah.
asking for Scarlet. Do you consider Wicca a true traditional pre-Christian religion?
No, so I don't think Wicca is a pre-Christian religion. I think it was inspired by pre-Christian religions, but no, it was kind of created by Gerald Gardner in the 50s. So there's kind of like two factions, at least when it comes to paganism, where you have like pagan reconstructionists and neo-pagans. So I kind of definitely started as a neo-pagan and as a Wiccan. And then over time, I still do like certain aspects about Wicca. Like I do celebrate the 8 Sabbats, the 8 holidays in Wicca. But I personally find myself moving more towards pagan reconstructionism. So how can I take actual, things from pre-Christian societies and bring them into the modern age? So so there's kind of multiple, groups within the pagan umbrella. Some of them are more new, some of them are, none of them are ever going to purely be the old religions, because we just don't have as much information as I wish we did, and there was no continuous line. Certain things are continuous, the archetypes, the symbols, the ideas, the energy, maybe that is a continuous line, but for the most part, you're going to find different pagans all kind of connecting either with the more neo-pagan or pagan reconstructionism or somewhere in between.
Wonderful. And Vance, I saw you flash the Greek Orthodox priest. I know you're secretly
Old
working for
religion.
Jay Dyer, so your cover has been blown, my friend.
Oh man, I knew it would happen someday.
My wife is so proud if you're Greek Orthodox. But anyway,
well, speaking of that, one of the witchiest shops in Chicago is the Athenian Candle Company in Greektown.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's like very Greek Orthodox, tons of cool Christian icons and stuff, but then they do have like the floor wash, like unhexing. They have, it's like a little botanica, but it is technically a Greek Orthodox place.
Yeah, every time I go in there, they're like, do you want a blessing? And then they start like pouring powders on my hands. And I'm like, yes, give me your blessing. And they sell like, obviously like the traditional like Christian candles, but then they do have all the Greek deities there too. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, they got like a good mix. That's a fun shop.
Wow,
Yeah,
I gotta check it out.
Yeah, I'm Italian Paradox. That's my religion.
You invented Christianity. But what was I gonna say? Here's a bit you were talking about the gods and all that, and I guess let me start with Scarlet. And this is a hard question. I don't think there's a wrong answer, because my views change. I know we live in a culture where if you say something in Twitter 3 years ago, God forbid you change. Hey, little cat. Well, I hope my dog doesn't see it. But yes, you're not allowed to evolve your views. But one thing, I used to have these long Skype conversations with Sorita Deste, and it's something she used to bring up on her Facebook page. She would say, the gods, she'd get very annoyed. She'd say, the gods are not archetypes, and they're not in your head. They're ontological. They are separate. They are entities. What, if I ask you this, Scarlet, what would you say about who are the gods?
Yeah, and I've kind of also vacillated on this. So then top of the whole neo-pagan and pagan reconstructionism, you have what's called hard polytheists and soft polytheists. Hard polytheists are the ones that think that, each pagan deity is its own figure. Soft polytheists might think that they might be more like energies or archetypes, or just like an easier way for us to connect with the divine. And I personally have vacillated back and forth on that. So I'm not sure yet. Sometimes I really do connect with the certain individual pagan deities, and I do kind of see them as individuals. And then sometimes I kind of see it more from like, this is the easiest way for me to connect with the divine source. So yeah, it's a tough question, and there's a spectrum there. And I have times when I'm a hard polytheist and times when I'm a soft polytheist, and I haven't figured that out yet. So hopefully I'll be more secure in my understanding in a few more years, or maybe I never will be, who knows.
No, and I mean the truth is the Roman and the Greeks who were, you might say, educated, they really thought that all the gods were the aspect of one God, one supreme intelligence. So it's not like things have changed that much for a lot of groups, especially if you're a non-dualist. And what about you, Dan? What are your views on the gods? Well, how do you say with a real Chicago accent? The gods.
The gods.
Gods.
Well, the gods. That's a really hard thing for me to answer. I think well, it gets me thinking that, okay, when if you treat the gods as the 7 traditional planets, which are associated with like the 7 days of the week, the number 7, it's like, okay, who decided that these 7 planets or gods or days of the week or archetypes were these 7 individual separate things? Well, probably like the Babylonians or the Sumerians, and then it turned into maybe the Egyptians, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans, and then in like the Middle Ages, they could be like this considered 7 archangels. So it's like, okay, if they're interchangeable, is it just sort of raw material that just chooses a different mask as the human condition changes? Like I think it all to me has sort of like it's like the structure of the gods are the structure of the universe, sort of like the zodiac, the 12 signs of the zodiac. The number is related to, the wheel of the year and the number 12, and the way that like it's like a sacred geometry thing to me. So in like the way in which gods come through and express themselves, I think can change and stuff. As to whether or not they're like separate from us, it's such like a deep and heady question, because it makes you beg the question, like, if everything is one, if God, in like sort of like a Kabbalistic perspective, is just like this monad at the top and everything emanates down, and by the time you get to the bottom, we're individual egos, but we're all sort of connected. It's like either everything is interconnected and everything is one, or everything is fragmented and then yes, they are separated. But I think in the experiencing them, it can definitely feel external, like I think you can have legit experiences where it is this other that's like affecting you or separate from you. But I feel like I answered that question horribly, but it's like it's like everything is everything.
Yeah, I mean, as Jeff Kripal and others have said, or Gary, like, I mean, we haven't developed a language to understand the complexity of the gods. So we're kind of, all of us are going from psychology to spirituality but we're getting there. I think we're getting closer, and that's what matters. We're far better than we were in the past. What about you, Vince? Do you think the gods are separate, or are they all aspects of Scott Smith?
Well, and Hillary.
And Hillary, yes.
Yeah, Scott and I always banter about Hillary, but it's, one thing that I always conceive of is that there's something in back, the monad. Like if you talk about it, it sounds like, I always think of a big ball, right? And everything comes out of it. But I think that's wrong. Existence itself is all pervasive, and it contains anything that can possibly be, and is indescribable. And that's more of what I think of when I think of like the monad. But it's not an object, it's existence. It's the background of everything. So that's what I think. As far as the gods are concerned, it's a matter of definition, because on the one hand, like if we think about Zeus and Hephaestus and all these guys, we don't see them physically, so they're not people, or like Jehovah was conceived of as a personal God. And I think that's kind of, if you think that through, I don't think the quote unquote gods can be like that, because if they have powers beyond an individual human, then they're not human, then they're not people, then they, they'd have their limitation of, they can only see here, they can only see there, they can only hear this. They couldn't be aware of so many things. So right away you start spreading out, they become something different. But I do believe in entities, and I think that it's really a relationship between our consciousness and whatever's out there. And so, I've experienced, a few things, and I know other people like pagans, Wiccans, and so forth have had experiences of the various gods and goddesses. Um, and that's real to us, but it wouldn't be real to you, except I could tell you about it. You could believe it. You know what I'm saying? So it's a personal thing. God is always, or gods are always, personal relationships between us and whatever it is out there that we're interacting with. And that's my opinion.
Good answer, my friend. So yeah, and the next question I wanted to ask, and I know I'm still going down this path of gods, and these are conversations I've had through the years, and again, my views have changed, my views are evolving, but it's the idea of sacrifice. I know, again, you get into these neo-pagan groups, and they're talking about, well, the gods have changed as humans change. I said, okay, I'll give you that. As our perception changes, so will these beings, because as Van says, we are interacting with them. What I don't think has changed is the idea that souls and blood are the economy of this universe. And I see a lot of pagans think that they can get away with sacrificing good intentions or positive vibes, and I think that that's the universe is still fueled by the life force of being, and perhaps the death and destruction of being. So when it comes to sacrifice, what are your views, Scarlet?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely something to what you are saying. And maybe that has something to do with, at the same time, you've had this resurgence in traditional witchcraft, which is more comfortable with sacrificing some of your own blood, or just like pricking your finger. That's a pretty common thing in traditional witchcraft. So maybe that has increased because there's a reaction to how light and airy and peaceful the New Age paganism is, that people are wanting to interact with something there's a bit higher stakes. So yeah, I think there is something to what you're saying. And I think it's not so much, maybe it doesn't necessarily need to be like blood and souls, but it has to be something valuable to you. Like, it has to be an actual sacrifice. So yeah, just sacrificing your intentions. I've done that plenty of times. I've been to many rituals where we do like intention settings, and then we burn our intentions, and that's the sacrifice. And while that's fun, and I think it definitely can help if you're really wanting to, forge a meaningful connection with the deity or get some serious stuff done, then yeah, you probably have to put a little bit more effort into your sacrifice. So I don't think we need to go all the way back to sacrificing animals in order to do that. I think there's other ways, but the sacrifice still has to be meaningful.
Starbucks, does that count?
I don't
Probably
know what
not
Moloch
quite
likes.
meaningful enough. But when you think about what our society, as we become more materialistic as a community, I mean, honestly, burning a $10 bill is going to be a much stronger sacrifice, perhaps, than even pricking your finger nowadays. So yeah, maybe I think it's just needs to be a sacrifice that you do feel that is something real.
Yeah, I remember Acharya, of all people, was, as much as he disliked Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, as especially Christianity and Islam, she always said that the one good thing Christianity did when it spread is it ended animal and human and child sacrifice across Europe, because it was still happening. I know the Romans, they would slip with the human sacrifice, but for the most part, they hated human sacrifice. but it was going on in Carthage, Western Europe, and all that. And sometimes it could get really, it was pretty bloody, pretty nasty. And what are your views, Dan? I hope you're not going to start a neo-Aztec movement, because we know where that leads.
Definitely. Oh, I was just at the Art Institute and I was like looking at these pots from ancient Maya and I was like, ooh, lots of like blood there.
Hey,
But
check out what I just put on my wall. See right there? That's my new Aztec calendar.
Nice.
My mother gave when we visit the Temple of the Sun in Tenochtitlan, we bought it. So I just put it up and let's see what happens.
Nice.
No sacrifices.
That's last millennia's calendar, Miguel.
Yeah, when you need a new updated calendar.
Yeah, the new Apple Aztec calendar.
Yeah, it's hard to take the pages off of it too, you know.
This is such a tricky thing to think about because on a very like basic level, it makes you wonder, you know, is everything that you're quote unquote feeding just an egregore? It's like, is the entire purpose of any sacrifice just to keep the egregore alive? And it's like, if you come, and for people that don't know what an egregore is, it's like a thought form or a tulpa that basically feeds on psychic energy. So people can be creating thought forms all the time. Like even like our podcast, we have a logo for our podcast. It's like, did we just create an egregore? Is this thing going to like gain psychic energy and start running the show? So that's always like the risk is that these egregore things have a mind of their own. And then throughout history, maybe these thought forms got so powerful that they were like, give me baby blood. And then it turned crazy. So that gets me thinking, like, is everything just an egregore? And how crappy is that if it's true? But like on a basic level, on a positive level too, like I think of, you know, just like altars. That's a popular sort of quote unquote pagan thing that a lot of millennials do, is a lot of people have altars. And it's like, if you have an ancestor altar, it's common that you like leave food or water or tobacco. So you have to like feed these spiritual things. And even, you know, in a lot of if you're trying to like connect with nature or land, you can be very reverential and leave an offering for just the land spirits. So on one hand, like I'm pro having altars and being reverential, and I think it can be effective to sort of feed spiritual stuffs, even if it's prayer and you like light a candle and sit there and say a rosary. Like, is saying the rosary a sacrifice? It kind of is. And you're like giving your time and your energy and your focus towards that, and that's external from you. You're like feeding the Virgin Mary, who like likes rosaries. So it's tricky. It's like, A, are we just feeding these egregores and we're giving away all our control? Or B, is it like you can't get something for nothing, so you have to pay your dues with some kind of sacrifice. So it's a really tricky and complex thing.
It is, and I think bringing the egregores, especially like the work of Mark Stavish, has just made things even more complicated. Now we had gods and demons and angels, and now we got egregores added. Oh, and archons too, could be aliens or mind parasites. It's just
it's like the ads on the internet, you know.
Yeah,
they're always wanting money. You gotta.
Yeah, and excuse me. In the chat rooms, Thoth Olmec is asking, when am I going to do ayahuasca again and talk to Sophia face to face? Good question. I would only do it with Santo Daime because I know the priest there, and there was a group here in Illinois, outside of in Chicago. I did an ayahuasca ceremony, but it wasn't a good experience. The ayahuasca was mixed wrong. I had a bad trip and it made me sick, and the rituals were all wrong. But so I would only do it with Santo Daime, but to each his own. So hopefully, and unfortunately, Santo Daime is not right now in Illinois. And of course, ayahuasca still, as far as I know, is banned. We had to sort of hide it. And hopefully one of the days, one of our idiot politicians will get wise and just legalize all drugs, just because treat our citizens like adults. But anyway, I'm getting off my soapbox. Vance, any questions for the audience, or you have
we
anything
do.
to say?
There have been a few buffering up. Let's see which one I'm going to take first. Toth Olmec had a couple, and he just asked one, so I'll pick another one. Do you guys, Dan and Scarlet, practice ceremonial magic, spellcraft? Any favorites to share? Any experiences and so forth to share? We'll start with Scarlet.
Yeah. So I do some ceremonial magic. I do definitely do spell crafting from time to time, sigil crafting, chaos magic, that kind of stuff. So yeah. I mean, it's not something I do every day. But yeah, I am definitely interested in all those topics, and do practice. Yeah.
And you feel it's fine, because that's always the big question in any spirituality. Should I use this magic for expanding my consciousness and the better of humanity, or damn it, I want those shoes, I want to raise at my job, that's where I'm using magic? What do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely am not a saint. Like I use it to like, get what I want sometimes, but I do, try to be moral to a certain extent. I'm not a big fan of hexes and curses. I have done that. I tried it in the past when I was younger, and it definitely was a big blowback. It did not end well, so I kind of learned my lesson, and I don't really feel the need to do that. But yeah, I mean, I probably wouldn't be spending too much time doing magic if I wasn't getting something out of it. So yeah, a little morally gray in that way.
And what about you, Dan?
I don't really talk about it.
We've got a black magician here.
I will say, like, I discovered Aeon Bite through Rune Soup, and I knew about the blog Rune Soup before it was a podcast. So I've heard tons of people talk about it over the years, and I'm fascinated by it. As far as stuff that I do, that's private.
Fair enough.
But there's so many, for people that are just curious about learning more, even on your show, Miguel, you talk about it a lot, and I think it's super fascinating to listen to people talk about it.
Well, you're talking about magic in general?
Yeah, the occult magic. Like, I listen to shows where people do talk about grimoires and stuff, and I'll go on the record and say I've never done that. But it's really, really interesting to hear the conclusions that people draw. And it's like, if these people are having these like real tangible experiences with spirits, I find it so interesting. And just the way I'm like, okay, if that's real, then what is this universe and how does this stuff work? But and I'll say, yeah, I guess I'll budge and say, like, I've tried stuff out. And I've been burned a couple times. Like, when it works in situations where it really works and you get creeped out, it's really like the monkey's paw. And it's like, yeah, I got what I wanted, but like, it came with all this baggage and you're kind of like, ugh. So I don't, but also, like, any good magician should know, like, if you reveal too much about your work, you're sort of taking away its magical power in many ways. So I don't really want to be known as like an advocate of magic, but I'm certainly fascinated by it and want to, like, I find it so entertaining to hear people talk about their experiences if they're willing to. So
well said. Yeah, and I think with magic, I've had blowback years ago, but that's because we go back to sacrifices. If you don't sacrifice something and you just think you're going to get away with it, it's going to come back to you. You got to pay. Nothing is free in this universe.
No.
There's always a price. So just shifting gears again, this is Aeon Byte Live. If you have questions for Dan and Scarlet, please let us know. Please support this show in any way you can. Of course, please support Dan and Scarlet's Cosmic Keys podcast. Independent podcasts are the ones that are bringing you the real gnosis, the real truth. We don't sell out. We are here on the ground, and we are here with the cutting edge information. We have not been compromised. Sorry. Vance, any questions from Z? Yeah, except for you, Dan.
Yeah, we got one on druids and
Druids.
relation to paganism. Druids are definitely pagans, I would say. But anyway, that's just my opinion. Go ahead, Dan and Scarlet.
Oh, are druids pagan? Yeah, definitely. I think so. Yeah. I mean, just with like paganism, there's so many different branches, and the druid community, I'd be curious to, see where it's headed to, because I think there's been ups and downs in the community growing and slowing down, and like if they still have much of an initiatory practice, but I don't know as much about the druids. So yeah.
I find Druidry super fascinating just because with all of this stuff, I really think that we all understand it, because I do believe in ancestral memory and the collective unconscious. And when you think of druids and you think of like the Merlin archetype or like the hermit archetype of the tarot, like that really, really resonates with me. And we sort of, it feels very Jungian to think that far back. So I find it really fascinating. And especially if you have like, I guess, European heritage, that was a big part of European ancient history. So it's cool.
Awesome. I think I see we got Oswald Spengler and the brilliant Oswald joining us, and he's asking a question. Would you ask either of them who are familiar with John Michael Greer of the Archdruid Report, Echo Sophia blogs? He has been a guest on the show. Brilliant thinker. I know it's kind of unfair because a lot of people have turned on him saying they're putting labels on him about his politics, and I think that's unfortunate because that does not change the brilliant work he's doing. But any of you two familiar with John Michael Greer?
I feel like I've heard the name before, but it's not really ringing a bell on how I heard about him.
Mm-hmm. I think I've heard him. Is he the guy that lives in Oregon, or is that someone else? There's like a druid guy. I think of him as just the druid guy from Oregon.
The druids from Spinal Tap.
But I guess the answer then is no. We don't really know. we can't even identify him.
Yeah, brilliant.
But I also recognize the name too, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Got another one, a quick one. This one's for Scarlet. Why is Inanna portrayed as the demon Astaroth?
Oh, I don't know for sure that answer. I think there's just something with the different goddesses. So Inanna is one of the older Persian goddesses. Is that correct? I'm just double checking because I'm not
Sumerian, I think.
Sumerian, yeah. So I'm not as familiar with the Sumerian pantheon. But I think you'll find that over time, many of the pagan goddesses have become demons, and in part to kind of disavow pagan faiths. So, as the Abrahamic religions gained popularity, they wanted to make sure people converted. So a lot of these deities have been, transformed from their original intent. So
maybe Lilith.
Yeah, I was learning something interesting the other day about Paimon. No, not Paimon. What's the one in The Exorcist?
Pazuzu.
Pazuzu. Yes,
Yeah.
Pazuzu. So I was in the Oriental Institute in Chicago when I was reading up as I was going through the museum. And Pazuzu is like a really great deity. Like he's like a good guy. And and because of The Exorcist, everyone's gonna think of him as like the ultimate demonic Sumerian deity.
Oh man.
So poor Pazuzu, poor Iana, it just kind of happens that a lot of these deities become associated with things due to, people trying to convert, the pagans, all of that kind of stuff historically.
Well,
Go ahead, Dan.
Astaroth is like one of the demons in the Goetia. So, and the name Astaroth is connected with like Astarte, which is the other name for, what was the other name we were calling
Iana.
her?
Yeah.
Inanna. So it's sort of like I've just heard through this isn't from any experience because I've never tried out grimoire stuff, but I think there is the argument that these were old pagan deities that just got demonized at a certain point, and now they're they were named differently and changed from a beautiful woman to like this like vulgar looking demon thing at whenever the grimoires were made, but can't really say I know a whole lot other than that.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
So, happens.
Sorry guys,
You
my
okay?
camera decided to have
Yeah, I saw that.
Summoning demons or something. Inanna's not happy with me.
Yeah. We
And
invoked something.
She's one of my favorite goddesses. She's a Sophia prototype, an underworld goddess. She's awesome. And Scarlet, what about you? Are there any deities that speak to you personally or that you personally are devoted to?
Yeah, there are. And I think it also shifts over time. So I do still have a lot of personal connection with Venus, Aphrodite, that I connect with a lot. I'm also very interested in the Norse pantheon. So I do feel personally connected to Odin as well as Freya. And Freya is kind of similar to kind of the Venus archetype. So those are some of them, but it also like shifts over time too. So like if I'm going to be doing a particular spell for a certain thing, I might call on a deity that best connects with what I'm trying to achieve. So it's definitely kind of like a ongoing relationship with certain deities. And then sometimes I bring in new ones. Sometimes the relationship kind of fizzles out, with other ones. So yeah, it kind of evolves and changes.
What would you say? Aphrodite is obviously one of these goddesses who gets a big. They make her into a caricature a lot, but when you study her, obviously she's a lot deeper, more fascinating. What do you like about her? And do you see? A friend of mine once said that he believed that every god has a shadow side, and it's part of that god. So Aphrodite, he always saw as the goddess of love, but also hate. She was a very extreme goddess who was more complex than we've been taught.
Yeah, I definitely think that there are shadow sides to all the different deities. And in a way, that's what makes kind of paganism kind of fun, because none of the gods and goddesses are necessarily meant to be morally pure in any way. So it can be fun, they're somehow more relatable to me, at least, because they're so similar to humans where they have flaws. It was funny because Dan and I were just interviewing today for our podcast, Jessica and Linato, and we were talking about Venus and the archetype of Venus and how she sees Venus so much connected to values. So it's not just aesthetics, it's not just love and beauty, but it's also your value system. And you kind of curate your beauty around you and your beauty within to fit within your value system. So I think there definitely is this deeper aspect to Venus. But yeah, I mean, I especially like, someone who's interested in witchcraft, there's a lot of kind of fun things you can do with Venus. Like a lot of people do magic to like enchant their makeup. So like,
Right.
kind of fun that are traditionally for me, like I'm kind of a girly girl. So I love to like do little spells with like putting on my makeup and stuff like that, kind of glamour magic kind of stuff. So so definitely feel connected with Venus, but I think there is a much deeper connection or deeper aspect to her, along with, the darker, more shadow side. But yeah.
Awesome. And what about you, Dan? What gods speak to you?
That's a tough question. I think, well, what comes to mind, I really like working with ancestors. So that's not really like gods, but I think there is value to like honoring your own ancestors and just like humanity's ancestors, since this is one big human family, because it's like at least that they were of this tribe. They're not like the Archon alien things out there. But other than the ancestors, I also like Catholic saints, because it's, I lived in New Orleans, and I sort of experienced a lot of like the voodoo culture down there. And saints can basically like be the nice face of some other deity. So like even on a basic level, like, we know that a lot of the Catholic saints were just like maybe not even real people. They were just like a way for paganism to fit into this new box of universal Catholicism. So I actually like I like those. I just and aesthetics is a big thing. Like I like the Catholic prayer cards and candles. I like the artwork with the halos. I like Indian deities that are just like trippy looking with tons of arms. I'm into that. I'm into like those type of deities. And as far as like deities that I've like the when I think of a deity that I had like hardcore experience with, it actually was a voodoo deity, sort of like a Gede spirit. So they're like the little skeleton dudes with the sunglasses. And they sort of rule like sex and death and revelry. So just by the mere fact that those spirits literally like lifted the veil and like came to me, and even though it was terrifying and scary, I can't like ignore that, because that kind of was the final nail in the coffin for me of like materialism. So I have strong belief in the spirit world after having those voodoo experiences too. So it's kind of a long-winded answer, but I'm into lots of gods.
Very cool.
And of course the top dog, the great spirit, the one and only, the main god. But these little deities are like, who do you want to hang out with in this life? You can like make friends with cool humans and shitty humans. You can make friends with cool gods and shitty gods too. So
there you go. The company we keep. So very important. And shifting gears here, a little pop culture to get to know you better and just again lighten up the conversation. Pagan movies, obviously. I think Scarlet was talking about it as we were younger, or maybe me not younger, but one of the entryway drugs into paganism, or at least the occult, are movies like The Craft, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, great series. What else? Harry Potter. There's a whole bunch of them. Scarlet, what are some of your favorite pagan theme movies? Yesterday, today, recently, whenever, that really affected you?
A more cheesy one that really affected me growing up was a made-for-TV movie of Miss of Avalon.
Oh, my mom loved that show. I love the books, but I didn't like the movie.
Yeah, no, the movie was like, I saw that, and like, there's this island of Avalon, and it's like all these like women who are learning about the goddess and like gaining the power of the elements. And I'm just like, when can I go to Avalon? Like, this is my calling. And then at that moment, I'm like, okay, I want to be like a priestess and live like kind of a monastic life, but for the goddess. Like that was always like, okay, that's my life path. Oh wait, that doesn't exist. There's no seminary I can join. So that movie and that book had a big effect on me. And yeah, like The Craft, Practical Magic. Of course, Lord of the Rings though too, kind of that, connection with nature. Like the second Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, was always my favorite because you have the Ents and the trees and the forest, Fangorn forest, all of that kind of stuff. It just like really connected with me. So yeah, I mean, there's so much in popular culture when you think about it that is very pagan. And even, you know, more modern times, you know, the Game of Thrones series, there's like a whole lot of paganism with the weirwood trees and that, and the different religions, the religion of the seven, and then you have the old gods, you know, a lot of different competing pagan religions actually within that series. So yeah, there's a ton out there that has inspired me.
Awesome. I think Thoth Olmec was talking a dark song changed my life. Yeah, that's right now that is my favorite. You might say occult pagan movie because it really is a beauty about transformation and faith and forgiveness. A movie I like to revisit. What about you, Dan? What are some of your more occult or pagan theme movies out there? Anything that really influenced or that you just really dig?
Well, the first thing that came to mind was actually a video game, The Legend of Zelda. That had a really strong influence on me growing up. I remember, you know, it's one of those things. I don't know if this points towards maybe past lives, but I think some people love the fantasy genre, and some people just don't. like my brother is like, I don't get why you like Game of Thrones so much. I just don't get it. And I'm like, because you didn't live it or something. So I don't know. I have this weird, like, maybe it is ancestral memory of like this other time. And so The Legend of Zelda, when I was a really little kid with like Super Nintendo in the early 90s, I just remember, you know, you get Mario, you get Super Mario and all that. And I remember on a cereal box, I saw this little cartoon of Link, who's like the hero of A Legend of Zelda. And he's got pointy ears, like elven ears, and a green hat. And I just remember being like, I need that game. Something resonated with me as like a 5-year-old. So that was around in the early 90s with Super Nintendo, and then in the late 90s with Nintendo 64, the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. That game, you know, there was temples, there were fairies, there were monsters, there was magic, and it was very elemental too, because you would have to defeat them in the forest temple, which is like the earth element. You would have to go to the water temple with these like mer people, you know, and it also points to like the Joseph Campbell type stuff of like the hero's journey. So I think Legend of Zelda definitely stands out, and as well as Game of Thrones, that really resonated with me and really opened up a lot. And it sounds cheesy because it's just like a TV show, but that show I was really into, and then it tragically ended horribly.
Another one who didn't like the last season, huh?
Oh hell no. But those are probably my top two. And then obviously Lord of the Rings is great. I was not like off the bat into Lord of the Rings, but Game of Thrones and Legend of Zelda, definitely.
Yeah, I think I can admit mine was pretty intense many, many moons ago when I was 12. I think in the same year I read The Lord of the Rings and I started playing Dungeons and Dragons. So it was just an intense year where I said the universe is a busy place and there's so much. And then you find out later that Gary Gygax, the creator of Dungeons and Dragons, was a Jehovah Witness. But then again, Tolkien was a practicing, you know, very Orthodox Catholic. So never know when these energies are playing with us. So as we get to the more or less to the end, Vance, do you have any questions from the audience?
Well, we had one on opinions of the oppression of Bolivian paganism, and I don't know what Pachamama is, but pagans still being persecuted. You guys know about that? You mad about that?
Well, you know, I'm not super familiar with what's happening in Bolivia specifically, but I mean, I do know witches are still being burned and stoned in the world in Africa.
Africa.
So, there is still significant persecution around the world. Luckily here in America, like I feel pretty safe. And that's been a huge shift. I don't really think people are super scared of witches anymore like they used to here in America and in many other countries. But yeah, in other parts of the world, like it's still very scary to go against the norm. And yeah, I feel for those out there that are struggling with that.
I've never, I'm really not familiar with the Bolivia thing, but it just gets me thinking like, as I've kind of referred to before about like past life memories or ancestral memories, like I for so long would never talk about this stuff and was totally cool being under the radar with it. And I wonder, it's like, is it because I have a past life memory of being burned at the stake for being a heretic? I don't know. I really feel like there's nothing wrong with keeping stuff behind closed doors, because what if things could change at any moment and there could be the pitchforks at your door and you never know. But maybe that's just paranoia. But
Well, you never know what kind of hornet's nest you're going to raise. I mean, for example, at my day job, I've become friends with the head of operations, and he's Mexican, and he likes to watch this show. And ¿Cómo estás, Iván? Si estás, estás escuchando este episodio. So anyway, but I also knew just having conversations with him that he was into Nietzsche and mystical Islam and philosophy. So one day I said, "Hey, here's my podcast." But then, like today, this the one of the accountants comes, and he's this old guy, nicest guy in the world, but I can tell he's also a very fundamentalist Protestant Christian. And he's like, "Miguel, I hear you have a blog and a site. Could you give me the address?" And I'm like, "I don't know, dude. If I send you this God above God, you might have a heart attack, or you might go to HR, or..." So it's never easy to, you might say, come out anywhere. Not that it should matter, but at the same time, it's not something we should hide, right?
Well, I don't know. So I kind of keep cosmic keys. Well, it's weird. I've recently kind of been sharing it a little bit more, but there's just, I think it goes into early childhood. If you were raised with religion, there's just like literally 2 or 3 people in my life where if they found out about all this stuff, I could just feel the shame. Like I could feel the shame hitting me and weighing me down. It's like, it's really like insane how programmed we are. But I think the average person on the street just doesn't get it. So it's like, what they don't know can't hurt them. But I'm also like in astrology, from an astrology point of view, I have a lot of Scorpio, so I'm very stealth with stuff. But yeah, I think it's great to be open and to come out, but I also think that most people don't understand what's really going on with this stuff, and they will judge. So I don't think there's anything wrong with keeping it private in certain situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the greatest benefit, right? Because if you were going to share something that would upset the person and make them angry and want to get back at you or violate your freedom in return, what's the point, right? You have to make that judgment, I think.
Yeah.
I got a question, Miguel. Do we have time? This is a good one. This is a good question. I suddenly thought that witchcraft and paganism, if it has ceremonial magic that, wants to affect the world, it's kind of like the X-Men, right? They had the different abilities. And I think that's why they got persecuted, because the guy in the street says, wow, the witches, they could curse us, they could hurt us, and they have these powers, and we don't have these powers. We'll rise up there, the pitchforks and the stakes and the fire. So first of all, do you guys think that it's actually possible for magicians and pagans and Wiccan practitioners or anybody to actually become powerful and curse people and ruin their lives unilaterally? Like I know, Dan, you were talking about the voodoo and so forth in New Orleans, and what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, go ahead, Scarlet.
I think it is possible. I think you could ruin someone's life if you wanted to. So yeah, I do believe that there is real power there, especially when it's not just you. And that's, again, kind of bringing it back to community. I think a group of people directing their intention and their energy towards something that has more power usually than one individual person. So yeah, I do think it is possible, and it almost is kind of a little bit like an X-Men superpower. I wish it was more like, I wish it could be like Mystique or like Storm, but yeah, I think it is possible. Like, I think amazing things have happened in the past. I think you could even, some people like to make the case that, like, Jesus was a magician. Like, he just had like an advanced level of understanding magic. So miracles are they just magic? So, I mean, you can make the case that there have been these high level individuals in the past that have been able to do things that defy our laws of physics. But yeah, I mean, I do think it's rare. And I think a lot of people like get really worried, about like, oh, a bunch of witches are going to hex me. But I don't really think it happens that much. I mean, most people, when they're doing spells, are just trying to like improve their own lives. People tend to not be so vindictive. I mean, to each their own, but in my personal experience, I haven't run into many other witches that are like, we need to curse my boyfriend tonight. I don't think that happens that much.
Yeah, I think when you are getting to the point where you're picturing actual X-Men powers, like in reality, I can't help but think of like hardcore black evil sorcery. Like, just because even it makes me the thing that came to mind when you were talking about this is in Native American culture, they have like the concept of a skinwalker, which is like a sorcerer that can shapeshift and do all these crazy supernatural powers. And it's like, at what cost do you get those powers? In their lore, they have to break like the worst taboo. They literally have to sell their soul to the devil himself, metaphorically. Like, they have to kill a family member or just break a crazy taboo and just give into the darkness, and then they can do these crazy things. So I think to get to that level, you sort of do need to do something really extreme like that. But on a more positive note, I'm sort of the belief in just all magic aside of the human, when a human being is at their full potential, that's like the real magic. When you're living your soul's purpose, and when you're doing what you're here to do, you're just like emanate. Your soul itself has the power to do real magic, I guess. And when we are talking about doing spells or trying stuff out, trying voodoo, I feel like this is just my experience with all that. That comes from like an insatiable curiosity to lift the veil and to see that we're not in just a dead reality and stuff. But ultimately, doing that kind of stuff isn't going to really save your life or really improve your life. It's like doing your soul's calling and living what you're supposed to do is more powerful. And that makes me think of like a Gnostic perspective too. Like, because if our home is the pleroma, or this like heavenly high thing, and we're down here stuck, it's like, okay, there might be some rules in this reality that you can like do magic and like cast a spell and make something happen. But then where does that get you? Does it get you closer to your soul? I don't know, maybe it does. Like for me, it kind of it's been part of my journey to explore these topics, because I feel like that is my soul's desire, to understand the occult. But ultimately, it's like I just think the human soul is magic enough, which sounds cheesy, but that's what I believe.
No, well said. And this is a wonderful way to end. Certainly inspiration, something we should all thrive to, because again, there is what is temporal and there is what is eternal. So it's a choice. And something I love what Jason Louv said recently. And that sort of, it's the clarion call in one of my future introductions I'm working for. And he said, the great choice for our generation, or any generation in this digital world, is to choose between entertainment or ecstasy. So, and I think he's spot on when you think the digital world, social media, television, politics, all that. And then there's that ecstasy that the Gnostics and the shamans and the mystery religions, can we get out of our own bodies, our own heads, into something so much higher and that feels 1,000 times better than any entertainment, pure bliss. So I think that's the big choice.
Amen.
Amen. Can I have an amen, brother?
Amun Ra.
Amun Ra. Yeah, we have to do the pagan thing. So, well, great show. This has been really a lot of fun. But Kronos, the other pagan god, is telling us that he is taking away his energy and we must end. Thank you, Saturn. So before we end, I would like to thank the audience out there for great questions, great conversations. And of course, please support this show. We've got some exciting things in the future. And I can't do it without you. I don't have any sponsors, and I can always use your help. And I hope I have helped you in your journey to finding your choice between entertainment and ecstasy, and it's your damn choice at the end of the day. So, but thank you for the audience, for the Aeon Byte audience. I appreciate you keeping us company. So first I'll say, well, first a little information. Could you guys give us, again, we'll have the information about where you are in the show notes, but how about a little audio information? I know there's a Cosmic Keys podcast, but Scarlet, you also have your own YouTube channel, right? Which I subscribed. I'm just setting you up.
Oh, thanks.
Say it.
Yeah. So I post weekly videos about paganism, magic, and tarot on YouTube. So you can find me by just typing in Scarlet Ravenswood. So yeah, I do that. I'm on Instagram at Arcane Alchemy. My personal website is arcane-alchemy.com, where I blog and do videos about these kinds of topics. And then, our podcast, we have a website for our podcast, cosmickeyspodcast.com. Our podcast is on Instagram too. So that's at cosmic_keys_podcast. So check us out there. And we have a lot of fun interviews that we've been doing lately for our podcast. So a lot of good stuff. And we're almost at our 1-year anniversary for our podcast too. We started on the winter solstice, so we're getting close. It's been such a wonderful journey. So I hope you all who are watching right now come join us.
Yes, please support them. They do great work. And then anything else to add? Are you going to end with telling us that Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself?
That'd be a little redundant because everybody's been saying that.
The one theme that unites every religion and political ideology. That's it.
Yeah. Talk about human sacrifice and selling your soul to Satan himself.
Yeah, I think if there was an apocalypse and that some aliens came 100 years ago, who was this wonderful Jerry Epstein god that united humanity for one cause? It's like the irony of things. Anyway, that's my mind going.
He died for your sins.
he died for their sins, for his
their
crew.
sins, really. Yeah.
He's it's like before they sacrifice you to the Aztec gods, they get you nice and fat and give you a lot of perks, but then bye. But what are we talking for our
anything you want to promote, my friend?
For we have Scarlett's mentioned our website and stuff on Instagram. We are at cosmic_keys_podcast. We post little astrological updates throughout the week if you want to just stay in the loop on what the planets are doing. And I have an artist page on Instagram at Shook Daddy, SHUKEDADDY. So thanks for having us though, Miguel. Like I can speak for myself. I've been a huge fan of your show for literally years. And it's a lot of shows that I've been listening to for this long, I kind of get bored with, but honest to God, I'm not bored with your content. It's still just as good as it was like 5 years ago. So good job.
I try to make every show even more unhinged. I think that's my goal. At one point, you won't even know what I'm saying. I'll just be like, blah, 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 blah. That's my goal, to make no sense at all. Then
it makes a lot of sense.
I have reached ecstasy. I think that's my goal. So, but I appreciate the kind words, and it's been a pleasure. Vance, thanks for being here on this show, trying to understand the challenges, benefits, and where we are with modern paganism.
Oh, it was always my pleasure, and it's a lot of fun, and I enjoyed myself tonight. And nice meeting you both, Scarlet and
nice to meet you too, Vance.
Yeah, nice meeting you.
Yes, Scarlet and Ned, thank you for being here, and we should do it again. Since we're so close, maybe we could do a in camera one thing. Let's brainstorm to take it up a level next time. So
anyway, maybe Wakanda field trip.
Yeah, or the vault of Al Capone. See, like Geraldo.
Yeah.
But anyway, thanks for being here, guys, and thank you, audience. Thanks for being yourself, your true self. And as I would say, heresy shouldn't be this much fun, and tonight it was a lot of fun. So thanks, everybody. Definitely. And have a good night. And of course, for those of you celebrate or don't celebrate, please have a great Thanksgiving and a day of gratitude, or whatever you want to celebrate next week.
Thanks,
Miguel.
Wait, how do I do? Oh, I'm still not hitting live YouTube. I'm like hitting 20.